Hey, it's Tom Jordan. About as bold of a first day in office as you can get, right? The cold weather did not slow down Donald Trump as he sat amazingly in front of thousands, if not tens of thousands of people at Capital One Arena, signing those executive orders. And that was after a momentous inauguration address. This was him yesterday, of course, giving the address at the state capitol, U.S. Capitol building. This is kind of the highlights of it, of his inauguration yesterday. And Donald Trump, he's not waiting to make history. He is sprinting into the second term with this seismic wave of executive actions aimed at restoring American sovereignty and its security and its economic strength. It's standing on the world stage, from the southern border to, federal bureaucracy. His sweeping reforms, he says promises a complete course correction for the entire country. It was Inauguration Day yesterday, and Trump declared a national border emergency. He says mobilizing the military to secure the southern border. He's unleashing all these new tools to crush criminal cartels. He's reinstating Remain in Mexico, building new border walls to end the chaos once and for all. And these offshore wind leases, the electric vehicle mandates, the Paris Climate Accord terminated. He's pulled out of it as he's saying, listen, we got to go back to energy independence in this country. Drill, baby, drill is what he said time and again. And did really dismantling the Joe Biden era constraints on natural gas pipelines and fracking, even though they claimed the opposite was occurring. So that's just the very beginning, what he did yesterday. And it just went on and on and on, went back to the White House and signed more executive orders last night. So we're going to get into all of that along with the abolishment of DEI programs, in-person work requirements. Yes, you got to go to work, fill up those empty and very expensive office buildings in Washington, D.C., and then, implementing free speech protections and the ending the weaponization of the Department of Justice. A lot that Donald Trump did yesterday. And so we want to bring in an expert, of course, always. Roshini Rajkumar, a political analyst and host of the Crisis Files podcast. Good to see you again, Roshini. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Happy New Year, Tom. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. Happy New Year to you as well. We haven't talked since way last year, so it's good to have you back. I'm watching this yesterday and listening to the speeches and the comments, and it kind of feels like a bit of a reckoning, don't you think?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it was pretty obvious. We got some preview of it before Inauguration Day that his first day in office would be very sweeping, very bold. So, from his inauguration speech throughout the day's events, and whether it was the signing chair that was at the immediate post party, post reception kind of area right there in the Capitol building, or over at the arena, Capital One Arena, where they had set up that desk on stage, it was pretty obvious that signing executive orders and actually doing some work on day one while also partying, which we saw happening, but the work was definitely something that the Trump team was holding out as a big part of that very first day in office.
Yeah, that was a priority to get a lot of work done, and that's really what it was all about, I think. But do you think it lost? They had to move it indoors because of the weather, which Cameron Harris and I were looking at the weather yesterday. We think, it's actually warmer in Washington D.C. than it is here in Michigan. And I'm sure the same thing in Minnesota. It was like 27 degrees. We're like, that's not maybe as bad as they had anticipated. But that being the case, they moved it indoors. Did it lose, you think, the feel of a typical inauguration or the pomp and circumstance that we normally see on January 20th?
Well, look, nothing can really match the grandeur of having an event on the Capitol steps with 800 some thousand to a million people being able to line the mall area
Yeah.
down to, the monument after monument. So I don't think we can ever really compare apples to apples here. What I will say that was pretty profound about moving it indoors, and not that this is a new thing, it happened with Ronald Reagan, but that was many years ago. Some of us weren't even born or were just kids. So I have no big recollection of that swearing in. But what I will say is you got to see political allies and political foes right next to each other touching
Okay.
arms in some cases because they're sitting in chairs. And you got to see what their eyes said
Hmm.
when Donald Trump said some of the things he said. So the very
Yes.
fact that you saw so much of the corporate and political leadership of not only the country, but as your video was pointing out, leaders from the world. I mean, that's pretty amazing that they
Yeah.
were at this swearing in.
Definitely an international event, and we were just remarking, Cameron and I, prior to the program, about when there's Nancy Pelosi standing there, and Donald Trump shook her hand and seemed to kind of grimace afterwards as he kind of looked away from her. But it can be awkward, but it does say something about the priority of us as Americans, that you're still your political enemies essentially, and some of the things that they have said about Donald Trump and he's said back to them over the years, kind of hard to put that aside. So you only see these kind of reconnections at things like funerals. We saw that with Jimmy Carter's funeral just recently, and these type of major events like inaugurations. So when you look at like what he did yesterday, I don't know. We'll start with some of the executive actions on day one, the declaration of a national border emergency. How what that allows him to potentially do, like maybe using the military to go down and secure the southern border. How do you look at that, and how might that reshape the current immigration crisis and impact some of the states that are not only overwhelmed by illegal immigration, but some of them want to actually push back and prevent the Donald Trump national border crisis emergency from going into effect.
Well, we have to really think back to what some of his big campaign promises were. And one was securing the border. That was a big one. And my guess is a lot of people, both the people who were vocal and the people who were silent, Donald Trump got a lot of votes on just that alone, just that piece of his platform alone. So now, if he comes into office and doesn't actually act on it, he would get a lot of probably pushback or bad feeling from his base and others. So it's not surprising that he did what he did. Also, we have to look at the differences between some of the actions on day one. So when you talk about an executive order is pretty powerful. It's accounted for in the Constitution. Proclamations and other things are a little less so. So, what is it that he actually did? Did he sign a proclamation? Did he sign an executive order? Two different things. And that is something that anyone who might be against some of his actions from January 20th would be looking into legally. Also, there are certain things like the whole thing with TikTok and turning around or trying to turn around or give it a 90-day period. Two other branches of government spoke on that, the
Yeah.
Congress and the Supreme Court. So that's a little more difficult one. I mean, I found some big question marks in his words on Sunday saying, "Oh, don't worry, I'll try to get you your 90 days," sort of thing. TikTok should have just gone forward. It should have stayed locked down to follow the law. The president alone does not have the power to abolish something that Congress passed. So this is where the PR optics loving, center stage loving Donald Trump also needs to be careful that he checks with his team, with his lawyers, his advisors, the government lawyers now, to make sure the actions that he's doing are actually based in some sort of statutory law or our Constitution.
I totally agree with you on that. I don't agree with his statements regarding TikTok because you're right. The legislature has spoken on that. The Supreme Court just ruled on that just a few days prior to Donald Trump's inauguration, and yet he says, I'm gonna take care of it myself." Well, no, you can't really do that. But then you look back to some of the way that the President Joe Biden had kind of disobeyed the Supreme Court rulings on things like, or tried to get around with loopholes when it came to, college tuition forgiveness and all those types of things, and the border issues too. So yeah, there needs to be kind of a clampdown, understanding there's a reason why we have these three branches of government. And you can't just ignore those other branches. So I agree with you on that. I'm curious about these declarations of emergency, states of emergency. That in and of itself, does that not give the president at least temporary sweeping powers when it comes to things like healthcare or things like the border?
Well, I think the border is where he has a little more power. Some of the pieces with healthcare, a little more difficult because you're talking about multiple private corporations that are involved in that, as well as the federal government. And when we really go back to the Constitution, which I call the good book, when we really look at anything that's connected to the purse strings, anything solidly influenced by or connected to money, taxpayer dollars, that is under the purview of the Congress of the United States of America. So this is exactly the reason why what you mentioned about student loan debt, Joe Biden was not able to just wipe out millions, if not billions of dollars of student loan debt because the president doesn't have the power of the purse. That is something connected with the coffers of the United States, which was specifically given to the Congress by the Constitution, by the framers of that Constitution. So the border is one of those things where, as commander in chief, which is a constitutional duty or privilege, depending on how you look at it, that's given to the president in the second article of the Constitution. He has a little more power there because he can say, under my commander in chief role, I am protecting our country. So there's just a little more constitutional latitude there, Tom, when it comes to anything with either the northern or the southern or even the coastal borders of our country.
What I found very interesting, and he spoke a little bit about this, but his termination of the Green New Deal and those electric vehicle policy, those renewable energy policies, and he brought up the offshore turbines that were killing whales, and he talked about where those turbines are actually manufactured. Many of them are manufactured in China, and he was just saying these things. Listen, these things are not as environmentally friendly as you have been making them out to be. So he wants to pull out, of course, of the Paris Climate Accords, and he's doing that. He did that yesterday. But these and offshore wind leases, all these different things that we have really run into over the past 4 years, longer than that, but really specifically have more prioritized in the last 4 years under the Biden administration as it deals with offshore wind leases and renewable energy. Is this, what does this look like in your view? Because it seems like these industries are now so entrenched in not only in the kind of the fabric of this country and how many people kind of bought into this idea of an green new deal and renewable energy is good for the environment, but we've also got hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money going to these renewable energy efforts. How do you foresee this playing out? I mean, what are the challenges that Donald Trump is going to be facing when it comes to pulling away from that climate change ideology?
Whether we stay or whether we go, it's not going to be simple. It's going to be time consuming, but it does need to be guided by law. So, what usually will happen in these cases is one party or another will say, hey, president, or hey, United States government, or hey, state of Texas, state of Maine, you're not doing something right. We're going to bring a lawsuit. We're going to sue you or bring some kind of legal action. Then it does go to the courts to make some decisions. And I say that on one hand, whereas on the other hand, we have to look at what Donald Trump promised that his team would do, led by Elon Musk, looking at government waste. So my guess is one of the first steps could be looking through all these contracts. I mean, that's where you need lawyers, you need people who understand the economics, you need professional people who understand the numbers and understand the environment and the law to look at what are the agreements. These are taxpayer dollars. So ultimately, the federal judiciary, the attorney general, would be leading some of these investigations, along with presumably an Elon Musk and whatever that department's going to end up looking like. So if something is actually determined to be waste, then you've got to unwind it from our national coffers. Some of that can be done with executive order, but most of that, again, going back to the coffers, has to be done by Congress or a court saying, company X, you are doing something illegal and wrong, you must stop now, and issue some sort of ban. So we can't get away from the legal actions that will transpire, and I'm guessing quite a bit, Tom, in the next 6 months.
Yeah, and you're right. Congress they hold the purse strings here, so they're going to have to work with the Donald Trump administration, along with both houses of Congress. But he did mention this hiring freeze yesterday, and the emphasis on efficiency, as you were touching on, and within the federal government and the job. So we're gonna pause hiring right now until we figure all of this out, which is seemingly going to take some time to do it, and cutting waste. What might that look like, in terms of long-term structural reforms. Is this message really resonating with taxpayers? Do you think we understand as a country how much waste is out there as a result of this reckless spending by the federal government?
I don't think we fully understand, Tom. I really don't. What I do know, and I say this as a small business owner, is that I'm taxed pretty heavily. I'm in a state that taxes a lot, Minnesota. I'm based here, even though I work all over the country. And then I have to deal with federal taxes. And I, as a business owner, am paying the tax when I take a paycheck. I'm both the employee part of that and the employer part of that. So my company coffers have to have the money to cover all of that. And so some of my money from both the employer side and the employee side is going into the federal and my state's government. So I cannot wait to see what the results are of figuring out where there's waste. I don't blame the president for putting a hiring freeze. I can see how a lot of people would be nervous about this, but I don't know that anyone's sitting there saying the United States government and all of our administrative offices have not enough workers. I think there are a lot of workers. I think we need to figure out if they are put into the right spaces. I think this whole thing about work from home for federal and other government employees has to really be looked at, because we are paying those salaries. We are paying for, if someone is employed by the federal government and they're wasting away, and I'm not saying they are, but if they are, those are those are taxpayer dollars that are paying those federal wages. So I'd love to get some kind of an accounting. I mean, just like my bookkeeper and accountant work every year to make sure I'm following all the laws, and I help them share in that responsibility, help me share in that responsibility. I'm not going to get a pass if I'm not following the laws as a business owner, uh, running my company. If, oh, I just decide one month not to pay taxes or not to pay my consultants. So those are the kinds of things that I am personally excited to see what kind of reporting comes out of the inspection of this government waste, quote unquote, government waste, or just even just where the dollars go.
Right, and then you're talking about efficiencies. Are people really getting their work done? If they're working from home rather than at the office back in Washington D.C. I happen to have a different style of work. I thrive in an environment where I'm alone and I can just get a ton of stuff done. But not everyone feels that way, and you can get away. And I not to mention all the real estate that is out there. A lot of it's sitting. I don't know, 70% empty. That's a huge expense as
And
well.
we're
So
paying those heating bills. I mean, we are
right,
paying the bills. The American people
it's
are paying those
massive.
bills. Yeah, and I don't mean to say that government workers are being inefficient. My point is we don't know. So we need
Right.
to find out and
Yeah.
let them flourish and thrive and have a good culture, but also not have a bunch of real estate sitting around that we're paying on.
All right. The vast majority of the jobs that have been created over the past, year and a year and a half have been government jobs, and that's something that we need to. So you're right. I think no one's thinking, oh, there just are not enough government jobs out there. Let's put a pause, figure things out, and then go from there. What do you think about these DEI policies? Because just in the private sector, there's been more and more of a pushback against that style of hiring individuals based on, their diversity or their skin color or whatever it might be, or their gender identity, and that's been paramount over the past few years. And we've seen, the Bud Light, infamous debacle with their decision to put on what I forget her name,
Yes,
Mulvaney or
the
whatever.
transgender
Yes,
influencer.
and they're like,
Yes,
"Listen, you can't
yes.
force this stuff down our throat." But I know there's a feeling out there that people are hired, and they're favored solely based on maybe the color of their skin, or their intersectionality of some sort. And Facebook is now getting rid of all their DEI type of mandates and stuff like that. So Donald Trump seems to be doing in the federal government what it appears that more and more the private sector is doing as well. Do you think this is the right way, basing these hiring ideas and decisions based on merit over these other issues?
So in law school, they teach us about prima facie case of discrimination. So is it on its surface discriminatory? And unfortunately, a lot of the policies, because when many of these corporations, 2020 and post 2020, were creating these task forces or creating different policies within their various locations and with their employees, they were saying things that, if you really look at the language, a court or the Constitution, using the Constitution, would find the language discriminatory. So I think people need to separate our inclusionary practices that are equitable, where everyone doing the certain and same kind of work get the same pay. Are those good? Absolutely. When we start saying 10 of those jobs need to go to someone who's brown, 5 to someone who's black, 2 to someone who's disabled, when we start doing quotas or things like that, it becomes discriminatory. And whether it was on the face, prima facie discriminatory, or in practice discriminatory, discrimination is still discrimination. And I know a lot of times with the DEI policies that at least make the headlines, people argue, well, they're making up for past inequities. That's just not the way. I think if Martin Luther King Jr. were alive today, he'd say, that's not the way. No person should be judged by the color of their skin. And I say this, Tom, for people who can't see me right now, I'm a brown woman. I have faced discrimination my entire life, my entire business career of nearly 20 years. And what I will say is, I always try to stand on merit. So when we, as business owners, as managers within companies, when we look at merit and we hire based on that, usually you're going to get some of the best people, and hopefully you get an inclusive, diverse mix of people. What this kind of hiring requires is you don't just go to the same old sources to find your potential employees. That's step one. But I think the fact that these different companies are separating from their prior DEI policies or some of the laws that were out there, I think what they're saying is, hey, we need to relook at this. I don't think they're saying being inclusive in our hiring practices is wrong, or we're going to stop doing that. So I would blame both the left and the right for using that term DEI or DEI policies as kind of a rallying call to divide. What we need to look at is, what does the policy say? Does the policy say you're going to be hired and paid a certain wage for this job, regardless of who you are, because you have X, Y, and Z experience?
Yes.
That is legal. That is what
Yes.
it should say. If
But
it
that's how it's
says
always been. I
anything
mean,
else,
yeah, I
yeah,
totally agree with you on this. Everything you said here, I completely agree with, because I've always
yeah.
taught even my kids about inclusivity. You don't exclude people. And it can be a whole, you could manifest itself in very different ways. It could be based on skin color. It can be based on, intellectual prowess or whatever it is. And that's kind of the root of bullying kids at school. No, you go to that person who's sitting alone, you include them with you, whatever the reason is for that. And I think what the DEI has become, and you look at a lot of the, the structures of it and the regulations within those programs, they do actually end up excluding certain individuals based on that person's skin color, if they're not a more favorable, they say, kind of attributes, immutable traits. And I think it just goes back to what, when you talk about discrimination, and you see at the bottom of these, white pages, whatever it is, these job descriptions, we do not discriminate based on sex, ethnicity, race, or all these different things. And that's how it should be. So everyone's included based on your merit. Nobody should be excluded. And I think if it went back to that, it would be wonderful. And you can have a diverse workplace based on merit. You're not excluding anybody based on their gender or their race or what have you.
And hiring managers just have to really be proactive in going to various sources, whether it's if you used to always hire from Harvard, that's a certain level of discrimination.
Sure.
Spread it around. You should go to
Mhm.
different colleges, different universities, technical schools,
Yeah.
but a certain job may require a certain level of education as well as experience. We can't change that, and we can't dumb down the jobs, but we can be more magnanimous in the
Yeah.
pools of people we're looking at for those jobs.
Yeah, such a great way to explain it. And I've had very dear friends of mine who happen to be African American applying for a job, and they turned them down because they found out that they felt like they were only being considered for this job or offered the job based on the color of their skin, and they were offended by it because of all the good work they've done over their career. And so, like, this is what it comes down to. This is what we fought against, and here it is, right in front of us. So, one final question for you. I know you got to run, but what did you make of the Joe Biden pardons? Not only of the likes of Anthony Fauci and them, the recent a couple days ago, but then his own family that he made just minutes away from his ending his presidency. He decides to pardon his brother and a slew of relatives in his household who haven't been charged with anything. These are preemptive pardons. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, Tom, you saved my biggest outrage for last. You did not know how appalled I was to learn about these while I was watching the inauguration on January 20th. And I
Yeah.
just happened to be scrolling on X and I see someone has put out a screenshot of the proclamation. Well, guess what? The proclamation or the order by Joe Biden was actually dated January 19th. So, all the things that leak out of Washington,
Mm.
this did not somehow get reported until after Donald Trump had been sworn in on January 20th. And you probably heard Biden and Trump drove in the same limo together. Do you think Biden told Trump, hey, by the
No.
way, I pardoned my family? Doubtful, because
Yeah.
we would have heard about it in Trump's inauguration speech. He would have ad libbed that in. I am absolutely outraged as an American citizen, as a voter, and definitely as a licensed attorney. This is just like incomprehensible and reprehensible that Joe Biden would do this. And on top of that, not only did he give them these preemptive pardons, he backdated it to 2014. So
Mm.
here's what I
Hmm.
would say to Biden's family, to Liz Cheney. And again, I'm not saying Liz Cheney asked for this, but if you really think as an individual you did nothing wrong, you should not accept that pardon. Because if a president pardoned me and I knew I was innocent of a crime or not guilty of a crime, I would say, no, thank you, President. Let's just see this one out because there is now such a tinge of guilt on all of those people.
Hmm.
And it's another big black mark. It's like that double exclamation point
Hmm.
in black that President Biden put on what was already probably going to be a pretty lousy legacy as president. I
Yeah.
am just outraged by it. I was
Yeah.
outraged when he
Yep.
pardoned his son, and I'm like beyond outraged, as you can tell
It,
at
it
this.
is absolutely absurd, and to me, it's more than a tinge or a stain. I think it's an outright admission that they are, in fact, guilty. And he promised he wouldn't do anything like this, and he said that Donald Trump was going to do exactly what he did yesterday, or on the 19th, as you said, when he actually, issued that pardon. But it came out yesterday, and you're right. Donald Trump didn't know about it until right after his speech. He said last night, "If I had known, you betcha that would have come up during my inauguration speech." But he didn't know. He just rode over with now the former president of the United States. I so appreciate your insight. It's really good to see you again. Roshini Rajkumar, host of the Crisis Files podcast. She is an attorney, she's a journalist, and she's also a political analyst. Roshini, it's so good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Appreciate it. Take care. Yeah, this is amazing what we saw, what we've witnessed. I had a sense, and I'd like to hear what you think about it as well. I had a sense yesterday, and I didn't expect to feel this way in a real tangible way, that our country has been given new life. Like, actually, democracy matters now. Like the mischaracterization that Trump was a threat to democracy, the reverse is true. We're restoring order in our country. And I feel safer in this country than I have before. Not that we have solved the problems that have been created and perpetuated by Joe Biden over the past 4 years and all of his supporters and whoever is pulling the strings behind him and the Kamala Harris's of the world. But I feel like, okay, there's hope. I think God has had mercy on us. In fact, that people care. He cares about individual people in this country, individual rights. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I feel like, okay, we are actually going to succeed. Where I thought if Kamala Harris had won or Joe Biden had won, we would have gone off the cliff as a country, and we would have been just another tool of global governance. Depending what Paris and the climate accords told us we had to do, or the World Health Organization or the World Economic Forum, we had submitted ourselves to these organizations, the United Nations. This is what Joe Biden had done. And there was no more national sovereignty. They looked down upon that because George Soros told them to. You want your millions? then you gotta strip away the borders, and you got to become one with the rest of the world and do it their way, the Eastern European style way of governing your people. And by the way, don't mingle with your people. Just stay in your little bubbles and tell them what they have to do, because you're not going to want to mingle with them in the places they're having to live now because of you. That's kind of how I've been feeling over the past several years. And boy, we got a reprieve at the very least. So we talk about border integrity and restoring that. It does protect national sovereignty. Securing the southern border isn't just about stopping illegal immigration. It's about reclaiming national sovereignty. And Donald Trump's immediate actions, including, military deployment and designating cartels as terrorist organizations, they demonstrate that protecting Americans comes before appeasing globalist interests or these open border advocates. Energy independence, it's national security. By ending Joe Biden's crippling green energy policies, Donald Trump's approach unleashes domestic energy production. It reduces reliance on adversarial nations. It's affordable, abundant energy will strengthen both the economy and, of course, national security. And it ensures that everyday Americans like you and me won't be held hostage by these, foreign oil or unrealistic climate agendas, which won't do a thing to bring down the global temperatures. It won't, because that's not what's happening in the first place, in my view. Accountability for, federal misconduct is long overdue. Joe Biden is not going to be, at least his family will not be held accountable for the crimes they allegedly committed on a very large scale internationally because of these pardons. But they are going to be looked at. They are going to be investigated. Can you do a preemptive pardon? Can you pardon somebody for a crime they've never been charged with, that has not yet been investigated? Can you pardon them for that? Why would you do that? In fact, unless you know they're guilty about something. And don't give me this, well, because Trump wants to go after his political enemies. No, that's what you've been doing for the past 4 years, and before that. Federal misconduct, it's accountability for that it's overdue. Suspending the security clearances, this was huge, of officials who lied about Hunter Biden's laptop to cover up the crimes allegedly committed by the Biden family enterprise. Well, that's a critical step towards, government transparency. If you want to trust in the intelligence apparatus of our government, then you got to strip away all of their security clearances. And that's what Donald Trump did yesterday. All 51 of those so-called security experts who are actually political activists, they'll have their security clearances terminated. And we hope that more happens after that as well. Anyway, so a lot he did yesterday, and I think is putting more trust, hopefully, in these public institutions that's been eroded under Joe Biden, and the bold accountability that's needed, that's setting this precedent that government actually serves the people, not the partisan agendas. I think ending DEI promotes merit and efficiency. DEI, unfortunately, they use these terms that sound so wonderful on the surface. Diversity. Yeah, all people, all Americans should be engaged. Equity, equal rights. Yeah, it sounds good. Inclusion. Of course, you want to include people in your governance or in your company, so long as they can do the job. And that seems to have been what has been put down on the priority list. Meritocracy. And it should not be the case in the federal government, because it is outright discrimination. Excluding people of a certain color skin should not be allowed in this government. It's about fairness. It's about competency. And they've been prioritizing ideology over productivity in the federal government. So this focus on merit-based hiring. So there's a hiring freeze now, thankfully. And I think it's wonderful that he's dismantling this whole Green New Deal, because it protects working families. It protects the country and national security. The Green New Deal is hurting the very people they claim to be helping. It doesn't help anybody except the very elite, the very, very top, who are getting these billions of dollars to start these companies that won't do anything to help the environment, but they do a lot to make us less secure, and most likely lead to brownouts and blackouts, as we've seen all across the world. So listen, I want to play a bit of what we saw yesterday. This was a very interesting situation. We're showing you some video of some of the highlights of the inauguration yesterday, and it was very intriguing. You're looking at international guests there. There's the president of Argentina, right? We see right there the circle around him. The tech billionaires were there also. Donald Trump has done something very unique here. He has united this country. People that used to be foes of Donald Trump and of conservatives have now come to the table realizing, okay, we may have been misled into believing that somehow these people were dangerous, when really what they want to do is allow anybody and everybody to freely speak their mind. And we think that Donald Trump's agenda is going to do that and a whole lot more. I do want to play you the first few moments of the president's inaugural address. He was very somber, he was resolute, but very hopeful. Take a look.
Thank you very much, everybody. Well, thank you very, very much. Vice President Vance, Speaker Johnson, Senator Thune, Chief Justice Roberts, Justices of the United States Supreme Court, President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, President Biden, Vice President Harris, and my fellow citizens. The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first. Our sovereignty will be reclaimed. Our safety will be restored. The scales of justice will be rebalanced. The vicious, violent, and unfair weaponization of the Justice Department and our government will end. And our top priority will be to create a nation that is proud, prosperous, and free. America will soon be greater, stronger, and far more exceptional than ever before. I return to the presidency confident and optimistic that we are at the start of a thrilling new era of national success. A tide of change is sweeping the country. Sunlight is pouring over the entire world. And America has the chance to seize this opportunity like never before. But first, we must be honest about the challenges we face. While they are plentiful, they will be annihilated by this great momentum that the world is now witnessing in the United States of America. As we gather today, our government confronts a crisis of trust. For many years, a radical and corrupt establishment has extracted power and wealth from our citizens while the pillars of our society lay broken and seemingly in complete disrepair. We now have a government that cannot manage even a simple crisis at home, while at the same time stumbling into a continuing catalog of catastrophic events abroad. It fails to protect our magnificent, law-abiding American citizens, but provides sanctuary and protection for dangerous criminals, many from prisons and mental institutions that have illegally entered our country from all over the world. We have a government that has given unlimited funding to the defense of foreign borders, but refuses to defend American borders or, more importantly, its own people. Our country can no longer deliver basic services in times of emergency, as recently shown by the wonderful people of North Carolina, been treated so badly. and other states who are still suffering from a hurricane that took place many months ago. Or more recently, Los Angeles, where we're watching fires still tragically burn. From weeks ago, without even a token of defense, they're raging through the houses and communities, even affecting some of the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in our country, some of whom are sitting here right now. They don't have a home any longer. That's interesting. But we can't let this happen. Everyone is unable to do anything about it. That's going to change. We have a public health system that does not deliver in times of disaster, yet more money is spent on it than any country anywhere in the world. And we have an education system that teaches our children to be ashamed of themselves in many cases, to hate our country despite the love that we try so desperately to provide to them. All of this will change starting today, and it will change very quickly. My recent election is a mandate to completely and totally reverse a horrible betrayal and all of these many betrayals that have taken place, and to give the people back their faith, their wealth, their democracy, and indeed their... From this moment on, America's decline is over.
Yeah, it's over. I do feel that that's the sense I was talking about earlier, that I had this tangible feeling of, yeah, we're on a new trajectory now in this country. And then from there, he went to work. He sat down last night in front of thousands of people and began the process of signing about 200 executive orders. It was wonderful. It was good to see it. It's a very unique approach to this. So I want to get to some headlines. I'm going to take your comments here in just a moment as well, but I do want to talk about this revoking of the security clearances that he did yesterday in one of his executive orders, the revoking of the clearances for 51 officials, that were claiming that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation, where there's zero evidence of that being the case. And it was a bold move on his first day back in the Oval Office. President Donald Trump holding the security clearances of 51 former national security officials who had dismissed Hunter Biden's laptop as a potential Russian information operation. This was in 2020, and it was all done, I think it was led by Jake Tapper, the guy who would serve under the Biden administration. He coalesced all these people, got them all together to sign this false document. It wasn't true. And among those affected are high-profile names like James Clapper, John Brennan, Michael Hayden, John Bolton, all of whom hated Donald Trump and did not want him to become president. So they signed this widely, circulated letter claiming the laptop exhibited all the classic earmarks of Russian disinformation, despite admitting no evidence of any foreign involvement whatsoever. And their letter, released just weeks before the 2020 election, downplayed all these revelations from emails suggesting that Hunter Biden arranged meetings between Burisma executives and then Vice President Joe Biden, and there was a massive cover-up of what appears to have been an international millions of dollars money-making scheme that benefited the Biden family directly because of Joe Biden's influence in the federal government as vice president and overseeing diplomatic efforts in those very countries. So they need to be held accountable. This decision hopefully is just the beginning to revoke their clearances. But, he's got a commitment to holding officials accountable for undermining trust in national security. And Republican lawmakers have long criticized those officials. They politicized the intelligence industry apparatus and misled the public. And we know this is true because these investigations, they later confirmed that the laptop contained reliable evidence. It was not tampered with. And it implicated Joe Biden and the Biden family, along with all the other evidence of those Biden business partners that said that Joe Biden was actually the head of this whole thing, and he was getting quite a bit of kickbacks, millions of dollars, based on his influence. So that was among over, I guess I said earlier, 200 executive orders that Trump signed on Inauguration Day, including that withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accords and measures targeting federal overreach, censorship, inflation. First day agenda, very, very busy. Signals a determined return to his America First policies, but it starts with rooting out the corruption that exists. Another thing he's focused on is these deportations, crackdown on illegal immigration, and a lot of these municipalities and cities and states are pushing back, these sanctuary cities. Trump wasted no time delivering on that campaign promise to crack down on illegal immigration and deporting those who are here illegally and are committing very violent crimes. And now sanctuary cities like Chicago and San Diego and Boston are among these urban strongholds that are doubling down on their policies to shield violent illegal immigrants. And so there's going to be a clash here between these local leaders and the federal authorities. Federal authorities are charged with enforcing immigration laws. So yesterday, Trump declared illegal entry will end immediately. It's all part of this, sweeping agenda that includes potentially deploying military forces to the border and lifting the restrictions on immigration and customs enforcement, known as ICE. Donald Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, he pledged a game-changing executive orders and large-scale raids across the country. Chicago got the most, I think, news coverage on that. They're set to host the first wave of enforcement maybe this week. We'll find out. But it's going to be happening all over the country. And, you got the Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson vowing to uphold the Illinois Trust Act, which prohibits local law enforcement from cooperating with immigration laws. Don't do it. Denver, the mayor there, Mike Johnson, he slashed city services to fund migrant care. He's openly opposing federal deportation efforts, and he's likening the potential confrontations to a Tiananmen Square moment, that these illegal immigrants have rights, no matter how violent they are. Same thing is happening in San Diego. You got those like Douglas County, the commissioner. I think that's in the Colorado area. They're all pushing back on this. So it'll be interesting to find out what happens there. But of course, Trump is very, very serious about what's happening. All right, I want to play some of the key moments yesterday. Just over 3 minutes here. You've seen the video, but I want to play the audio along with it of the key moments of yesterday's inauguration events in Washington, D.C.
Honorable Donald John Trump.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States.
I, James David Vance, do solemnly swear
I, James David Vance, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Thank you. I was saved by God to make America great again. Today I will sign a series of historic executive orders. With these actions, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense. I will declare a national emergency at our southern border, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. Overspending and escalating energy prices, and that is why today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
suspicious skies for amber waves of gray.
I was going to talk about the J6 hostages, but you'll be happy because, you know, it's action, not words that count.
Bye. So long. President Joe Biden leaving the Oval Office. And it reminds me, my wife said that when she was a little girl and Richard Nixon had left and flew away on that, that type of a helicopter, she went outside because she lived in Bethesda, Maryland, where she grew up and outside the D.C. area. And she went outside as probably maybe 2 or 3 years old and waved. Didn't see the helicopter. But anyway, it was so long to Joe Biden, a tumultuous 4 years in office. And I think his last official act was pardoning his whole family from any potential charges of criminal activity over the last 10 years of their life, just in case they may have committed a crime like, foreign influence on the United States and a lot, whatever. The $30 million they may have made from, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Moscow, Russia, Romania, China, whatever it was. You can't be charged with that now. Don't look into it. We'll find out what happens with those pardons. But anyway, Joe Biden's gone. Donald Trump is now president of the United States. Today is his first full day in office. I'd like to get some comments here and some questions. We got a few in the works here. Cameron Harris is watching those and bringing them up. Jim Chikowski, Elon Musk won't have to look too hard to find government waste. I don't mind being fairly taxed. I do not like my tax dollars being used to fund idiotic programs and countries that hate the USA. I'm right there with you, Jim. We're supposed to be taxed in order to fund our government for the basic services it is supposed to provide for U.S. citizens. But beyond that, let us just kind of butt out. Let us do our thing. Certainly don't fund our enemies. It's amazing that we do that, right? Okay, Jim, thanks so much. Good to see you. All right, let's bring up another comment here. It is Harry Sakalian. Hey, good morning. Greetings, Tom. Good morning, Harry. Greetings, Harry, from the chilly but still free state of Florida. Yeah, Harry was up here the other day, and he popped in the Tom Jordan Live studios, the offices here, and I should have taken you back here. I didn't show you the studio. After you left, I thought I should have given him a tour. But anyway, he came in. It was nice. A brief reprieve from that free state of Florida to come back home for a few days up in Michigan. All right, let's get back to his comment. Even though Biden preemptively pardoned these people, can they still be formally investigated? Thanks, Harry Sakalian. I think they can. The pardon only deals with the federal government, so there can be other investigations that go on if there was any violation of a state law, for example, or municipal law, like Alvin Bragg investigated Donald Trump from a Manhattan office for a federal crime. So Letitia James did the same types of things. She investigated him, found something to investigate. I would imagine that there could be state investigations. In terms of a federal investigation, I don't think so. I don't know legally what the deal is with that, but if he's been pardoned preemptively, then I think that also means why would there be any federal investigation into any of those who were pardoned, because it would just be purely a waste of time. I think that the Congress can certainly investigate, at least get the information out there, and they have investigated, right? And they've already spewed the evidence and all the data out there that shows that Biden and Hunter and his brothers were involved in this as well. I don't know what more you have to do to convince people that he seems to have been very, very corrupt. All right, let's bring up another one here. It is Taz. Hey, Taz, welcome back. Presidential pardons have limitations. Number one on that list is a crime must have been committed. Very good point. Preemptive pardons tantamount to placing someone above the law. It was not intended for this. I think Taz exactly right. That's what they're going to be looking at. Does the president have the power to preemptively pardon someone just in case someone finds out that they committed some sort of a crime over the past 10 years, from 2014 till today? I don't think they do, and I think that will be vigorously investigated. Thanks so much for that. Another comment here from Cameron says to have fun with this. Joe Lapointe. Oh, my good friend Joe Lapointe. On day one, Trump freed thugs from a mob that tried to lynch Mike Pence on January 6th. Why duck this news? Is this fine with you? Yeah, you're right. You're not right. Actually, you're right that he pardoned them because people like you, they've talked enough about this for so many years. I think that if somebody tried to actually lynch Mike Pence, and that person should be prosecuted for sure. They didn't do that, did they? I think someone said something of that nature, but they didn't actually try to lynch Mike Pence. Joe Lapointe seems to think that these people were the most dangerous people in the history of the United States, if not the world. When there weren't any guns there. There weren't. I mean, it was horrible. What I do agree with Joe is that day on January 6, 2021 was awful. I don't like that kind of rioting at all. And it was violent. I give you that. And those who hit police officers, I don't agree with pardoning every single one of them. Anybody who committed violence should be appropriately charged with the violence that they committed. But if somebody climbed over a wall and didn't do anything other than that, they shouldn't be going to prison for years upon years. That's what concerns me. Or if they showed up or they happened to be in the crowd, because this was not planned as you people at the New York Times pretend that it was. It wasn't this planned insurrection. It was a bunch of people. The FBI admits this. Their investigation shows it was a protest that got out of hand and turned into a riot. That should not have happened. But certainly these people should not be going to prison for years, which is what this Department of Justice allowed to happen. People who are like grandmothers and sitting in jail, people committing suicide because their lives are effectively over because they happen to show up, someone say, hey, look, what's happening over there? And they take a look and they're arrested. Their homes are raided by the FBI because they showed up to what they thought was a peaceful protest. And they didn't engage in anything other than being there at the time. Joe Lapointe, if you do believe that's criminal, then you would absolutely support all of those 2020 protesters who actually committed serious violence and murder in 2020 and all those, civil rights protests, when in fact those were so incredibly violent. You would support anybody who showed up there to peacefully protest. They should be locked up for many years to come just for showing up. So that's the hypocrisy, Joe Lapointe. As always, so good to see you. Okay, let's bring up another one here. Office email. Livingston Christian School. Thank you for playing the Trump speech clip so heartening regarding revoking 51 security clearances. Need to be very careful and restore any that were given falsified information for their vote. I agree with you, absolutely. Yeah, 51, very good point. Thank you so much. Hey, listen, appreciate you watching today. We'll be back tomorrow, of course, 9 a.m. Eastern, streaming live, TomJordanLive.com. God bless you. We'll see you back here tomorrow.